Welcome back, deep divers. We're about to take a fascinating plunge into the world of Finnish alcohol consumption. You know, the material you sent me, it's really something else. It's got history, it's got culture, and let's just say some parts are downright funny.
Yeah, wouldn't you agree that Finland's relationship with alcohol, well, it's a story that's full of surprises. And the sources you've gathered, they're just perfect for this deep dive.
Totally agree. Now, for our listeners, I think you'll appreciate this. We know you love learning new stuff and you want it fast but accurate, right? Well, this deep dive, it's going to give you all the juicy details on Finnish drinking without getting bogged down.
You got it. The goal is to understand how alcohol consumption in Finland has changed over time, from the very beginning to what's happening today, highlighting those key moments and the things that have shaped how Finns drink.
So, ready to jump in. One thing that really stood out to me, and it's a bit of a head-scratcher. Did you know that for a while, drinking alcohol in Finland was seen as like a working-class rebellion thing?
Agree.
Crazy, right?
That's an interesting one for sure. Let's start with the basics. What can you tell us about the early days of drinking in Finland?
Oh, I'd love to hear your insights on this. Take us way back. What were the early chapters in this Finnish drinking saga?
Okay, so the sources show that alcohol has a really long history in Finland, like way back to the Iron Age. But here's the thing. For a really long time, the main drink was beer. But, and this is important, it was way weaker than the beer we drink nowadays. This went on until, the late 17th century, I believe.
So a different scene from the hard stuff we'll be getting to later, I imagine.
Exactly. Then, in the 18th century, things started changing. Distilled spirits. Vienna became the new thing. But even then, there was this home-brewed drink called sati, especially popular out in the countryside. Sati's pretty special, actually. Some call it a lost link in the history of brewing. That's how important it was.
Sati. Sounds pretty fascinating, like a window into how brewing used to be, right?
Yeah.
But it seems like Vienna really took over eventually.
Yeah, you're right. By the 19th century, Finland was mostly farms and fields, and guess what? Home distilling vinina became super common. But there's a sad side to this. When harvests were good, people drank more, and, well, more people died. It's right there in the sources. This deep, almost desperate craving for distilled drinks was everywhere back then.
Wow, that's intense. Alcohol wasn't just a drink, it was like woven into life, even death, it seems.
Yeah.
How did people back then react to all this drinking?
It's not surprising that some people started pushing back. Towards the end of the 19th century, two big movements emerged: the nationalists and the temperance folks. Now, they had different reasons for wanting to limit alcohol. The nationalists wanted a strong, independent Finland, while the temperance people focused on individual improvement. They believed that reducing alcohol use, especially in the countryside and among workers, was key to achieving these goals.
Ah, so it was tied up with Finland becoming a nation, finding its identity, right? So how did they go about changing things?
Well, the temperance movement was very active, particularly in schools, spreading their message. At the same time, a Christian revival movement took hold, preaching that drinking was a sin, bad for both the individual and the nation. So you had these two strong forces, and they started to have an effect. By the 1860s, there were already restrictions on distilling and selling alcohol in rural areas.
And that, of course, set the stage for Prohibition, didn't it?
Yes, exactly. After Finland gained independence, Prohibition was enacted in 1919. The idea was to use the law to tackle the many social and economic problems blamed on alcohol. But, as we often see, things didn't quite go as planned.
This is the part that really fascinates me, how laws that are meant to help sometimes end up making things worse. So what went wrong with Prohibition in Finland?
Well, although it seemed like a lot of people are in favor of it, Prohibition was pretty much ignored. People kept drinking. In fact, alcohol consumption doubled, maybe even tripled during those years. Smuggling was rampant, illegal production was everywhere, and doctors were writing prescriptions for alcohol left and right.
Sounds a bit chaotic.
It was. Arrests for public drunkenness went through the roof, reaching a whopping 25,000 in 1927. And here's the really troubling part. Murders actually went up compared to the 1800s. Actually, Finland's experience with alcohol and violence during Prohibition was more similar to what was happening in Russia than in the other Scandinavian countries. It's ironic. Prohibition was supposed to solve problems, but it actually strengthened the association of alcohol with rebellion, especially for a whole generation.
So instead of solving the problem, it created a whole new set of problems and changed how people thought about drinking. And this is where that idea of working class resistance comes in, right?
Yes, Prohibition accidentally created a new dynamic. Drinking became a way for the working class to resist the people who had won the Civil War in 1918, those from the middle and upper classes. It turned into a way to defy authority. So prohibition actually made Finland's relationship with alcohol even more complicated.
That's pretty powerful, how something as simple as drinking could become a political statement. So what happened when Prohibition finally ended?
Well, in 1932, they decided to try something totally different. They ended prohibition and created Alko, a state-owned monopoly. That became the foundation of Finnish alcohol policy. Alko controlled everything: production, imports, exports, sales, you name it.
Wow, the government really took charge of the whole thing. Quite a change from before.
You could say that, and they went even further. From 1944 to 1970, they had Vinicort, ration cards for liquor. It was a way to put a hard limit on how much each person could buy.
Ration cards for booze, that's something you don't hear every day. How long did they keep that up, and what happened after?
They gradually phased out the ration cards by 1970. Starting in the 60s, they began loosening those restrictions, and as you might guess, people started drinking more. Then in 1969, the government tried to make drinking habits in Finland more like those in other European countries. They wanted people to drink milder stuff and less of it. They even legalized mid-strength beer.
So they're actively trying to change drinking habits, like culturally, huh?
Yeah.
Did it work?
Not exactly the way they planned. While people did have more choices since the early 60s, the amount of alcohol Finns consume has actually gone up 4 times. And with more drinking, of course, came more problems.
So quite a long and winding road, wouldn't you say? From weak beer in ancient times to government monopolies and cultural engineering. Who would have thought? Well, we've seen how history has shaped how Finns drink. Now, I'm curious about the cultural side of things. How much is alcohol really part of Finnish society and traditions? Maybe you can unpack that for us.
Sure thing. One fascinating tidbit from the sources is that traditionally there wasn't much shame associated with getting drunk in Finland. Actually, in some social situations, it was seen as a sign of being friendly and outgoing.
So getting drunk is a way to be sociable. That's different from a lot of cultures.
It is. You see, Finnish drinking culture falls under what's called Eastern and Northern binge drinking culture. That means drinking mostly happens outside of everyday life, and it's usually a lot at once, not spread out. And think about where Finland is. Way up north, cold, not many people around. That kind of environment can shape how people socialize and how they look for excitement when they do get together.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you don't see people that often, you might make the most of it when you do.
Exactly. And there's the saying in other countries, drinks like a Finn, meaning someone who drinks a lot when they do drink. There's also the historical impact. Remember the ban on farmers distilling in 1866? It wasn't just about the alcohol itself. It took away a source of income and social standing for them that really shaped how Finns viewed alcohol. It became symbolic.
So it became about more than just having a good time. It was tied up with their place in society.
That's it. And this goes way back. Ancient Finnish traditions, like those bear songs and harvest festivals called Peshaset, involved drinking beer. So alcohol has always been part of their rituals. And let's not forget sake, that traditional brew we talked about. It's a cultural treasure.
So alcohol has been there throughout Finnish history and culture, sometimes good, sometimes bad. But I read that young people are drinking less these days.
That's right. Even though alcohol consumption has gone up overall since the 60s, younger folks are actually drinking less. Why? Well, maybe they have more things to do for fun these days, and maybe there's less pressure to drink to fit in.
That's a good sign, maybe a shift in how they think about alcohol, right? And we can't forget that connection between drinking and working class resistance. That must have really shaped Finnish drinking culture.
Absolutely. That historical context still resonates today.
All right, now for the fun stuff, something I'm sure many listeners are curious about. Kalsarikännit. Can you explain what this is all about?
Kalsarikännit. It's a uniquely Finnish thing, drinking at home, by yourself, in your underwear, and not planning on going anywhere. It's become pretty famous worldwide.
It sounds so cozy.
Yeah.
And refreshingly honest, I guess.
It is. And what's really cool is that in Finland, it's not seen as a weird or sad thing. It's just a normal way to relax. The Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs even made official emojis for Kalsarikännit. That tells you something about how accepted it is.
Official emojis, that's hilarious. Now it's officially part of Finnish culture, huh? What's the appeal, do you think?
Well, Finland has those long, dark winters, so maybe it's a way to shut out the world and get cozy and unwind. Rasmus Schuler, the Finnish footballer, once said that Kalsarikännit is the core of Finnish culture. It's about being honest with yourself, no pretending, just pure relaxation.
No need to dress up or impress anyone.
Exactly. Some people might think it sounds like too much drinking or being lonely, but Finns see it as a harmless way to chill out. It's kind of like the Danish idea of being cozy and content.
Kalsarikännit, the hig of drinking alone in your underwear. I kind of love it. But now let's talk about something a bit less cozy. Binge drinking. It seems to be a big part of Finnish drinking culture, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's right. Historically, Finns haven't been big on drinking a little bit every day. It's more about having those big drinking sessions now and then. But these binge drinking episodes have often been linked to, well, violence and other problems.
We talked about how being drunk isn't really seen as bad in Finland, sometimes even social. Do you think that has something to do with binge drinking?
I'd say so, because it's been historically acceptable and because drinking is often seen as something you do outside of daily life, those big occasions. It makes sense that these habits stick around. It's interesting, even though overall alcohol consumption has increased since the 60s, binge drinking hasn't gone down. For some, it's actually increased.
It's like having more access to alcohol, just amplify that habit of drinking a lot less often instead of changing it. And maybe the fact that people drank less in the early 20th century plays a role too.
That could be. First, there was a period of low consumption, then prohibition, which, if you remember, turned drinking into a symbol of rebellion for the working class. That could have set the stage for this culture of intense, infrequent drinking.
We keep coming back to that idea of rebellion. And again, that harsh environment, the cold, the darkness, the isolation, people have suggested that maybe it pushes Finns toward those intense experiences.
Yeah.
Have there been any studies on that specifically in Finland, or is it more of a general observation?
Well, it's tough to say for sure if there's a direct link, but it's a common theme when people analyze Finnish drinking culture. The sources also point to something else. Kids who have tough family relationships or close groups of friends, they're more likely to binge drink later on.
So it's a tangled web, isn't it? History, culture, environment, even personal relationships all play a part. Now let's shift gears a bit. What about the consequences of this drinking culture? What are some of the downsides, as one source put it, the sins of Finnish drinking?
The comparison they make between Finland and Alaska is pretty spot on. Both places have similar binge drinking patterns, and they're dealing with similar social issues because of it. And as we already mentioned, all that extra drinking since the 60s has led to, unfortunately, more problems.
And the sources get pretty specific about those problems, too.
Oh, yeah. Historically, Finland has had more deaths from alcohol poisoning than other Nordic countries. And it's not just about the drinkers themselves. Almost a third of Finns say they have problems because of someone else's drinking, so it impacts families and communities.
That's a sad statistic, showing how it affects everyone around them.
It does, and when people drink too much, it can increase the risk of domestic violence and other issues in relationships. It's scary to think that alcohol is a major cause of death among working-age Finns. 13% of those deaths are from alcohol-related diseases or poisoning.
That's a huge loss for the country.
Absolutely, and the health effects go on and on. Binge drinking raises the risk of heart problems, and constant binge drinking or alcoholism, that's linked to mental health problems, like being unhappy with life and feeling stressed out. While overall alcohol consumption has gone down since 2008, risky drinking is still a big issue. Most of that drinking happens on weekends and in the evenings. Even if only a small number of Finns say they're personally harmed by their own drinking, the overall numbers are still big, and that means the impact is significant.
It's a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it?
Mm.
Lots of history and culture tied up with drinking, but then these serious consequences, too. So we've talked about the impact of alcohol, but I wonder if these trends are the same across different generations. Let's look at how drinking habits are changing over time.
Yeah, things are definitely changing. Total alcohol consumption in Finland peaked in 2007. By 2019, it had dropped back down to what it was in 1995, so there's a general downward trend. One really positive change. Underage drinking has gone down since the early 2000s.
That's great news. Maybe young people are thinking about alcohol differently these days.
That's possible. But on the other hand, older folks, those 60 and over, have been drinking more, or at least the same amount, since the mid-1980s. It seems like the wet generation, the folks born between the late 40s and 60s, are influencing things as they get older.
So the drinking habits of one generation are kind of shaping what's happening now.
Interesting. And how about binge drinking? Is that changing across different age groups?
Well, binge drinking has gone down a bit overall, but there's a growing difference between people who do manual labor and those in higher paying jobs. It seems like how much money you have makes a difference, And there's another change. Fewer people drink with meals now than they did back in 2008.
Hmm.
That might mean they're shifting away from drinking regularly and moving towards those bigger drinking occasions.
Yeah, that makes sense. It ties into the data you shared earlier about trends across different years and age groups. Those numbers really tell a story. They do, don't they? Alcohol consumption went up among middle-aged and older people in the 2000s, then went down for everyone in the 2010s. But the over 50 crowd, they didn't decrease their drinking as much. Young adults between 18 and 29 are still the biggest binge drinkers, and they have the most alcohol-related problems. Though their overall drinking has gone down a bit too. Middle-aged folks, their drinking went up in the 2000s, then down. It's a mixed bag.
Lots of ups and downs.
You said it. Here's something else. For men, weekly drinking peaks around 30 and then stays pretty steady until they're 70. But women, they drink more gradually until around 60.
So men and women have different patterns as they age.
Exactly. Older women are starting to drink more like men, same frequency and regularity, though older men still drink more at a time. There are also some interesting differences in attitudes. Younger generations, the millennials and Gen Z, they seem more health conscious and they drink less. But the baby boomers and Gen X, they're more used to alcohol being a regular part of life. Recent data from 2023 showed that alcohol consumption was highest in the 55 to 69 age group and lowest in the 20 to 34 group. But get this. Those young men, 20 to 34, they were the most likely to be really drunk.
Wow, it really seems like there are a lot of factors at play here. Age, gender, attitudes, everything is shifting. Now, the material you sent me also mentioned Karolina Kotsenko. It seemed a bit out of place, to be honest. Well, that was an interesting thought, though I'm not sure I see the connection.
Yeah, trying to link a Ukrainian-American violinist who plays pop music to Finnish drinking culture is a bit of a stretch. While the image of Finns, maybe after some Kalsarikännit, trying to sing along to her violin solos is amusing, it doesn't really fit with our focus on Finnish alcohol consumption.
Agreed, it was a funny thought, but let's get back to something truly Finnish. Sandal is beer. I've heard it described as being as Finnish as sauna and sisu. So tell me about this national treasure.
Ah, sandals. It's a big deal in Finland. It's been brewed by Olvi, Finland's largest independent brewery since 1973. Though Olvi's connection to sandals actually goes back to 1971, they named the beer after Johan August Sandals, a Swedish field marshal and a hero of the Finnish War back in the early 1800s. He was known for being fearless in battle against the Russians and for his love of good food and drinks.
A war hero who enjoyed a good drink. Sounds like the perfect guy to have a beer named after him.
Doesn't it? And if you look at the packaging, you'll see all sorts of stories and sayings about sandals, a lot of them about beer. It's pretty clever. Sandals comes in different strengths, 4.7%, 5.3%, even 7.5% alcohol, and they have all sorts of styles. Pale lager, dark beer, wheat beer, even unfiltered.
Quite the variety, huh? And it sounds like it's pretty popular.
Oh, it is. Sandals is a true Finnish classic. Beer lovers have been singing its praises since 1971. In a 2015 survey, it was even voted Finland's best beer brand. And guess what? In 2023, it was the top-selling beer in Finland, with about 10.5% of the market. And that 7.5% version, it's Finland's third most popular strong beer.
No, those are impressive numbers.
Yeah.
What do you think is the secret to Sandal's success with Finns?
I think Finns are drawn to sandals because it tastes authentically Finnish and connects them to their culture and history. The branding is really smart, too. It ties the beer to Finnish identity, to that sisu spirit, that determination and resilience Finns are known for. Sandals is also sold in other countries like Sweden, Russia, and Ukraine, so its appeal goes beyond Finland's borders.
So, Sandals isn't just a drink, it's a symbol of Finland.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, this deep dive has been a real eye-opener. We've covered so much, from ancient Finnish brews to that whole Kalsarikännit thing, and of course the legendary Sandals beer.
It's been quite a journey, exploring all the twists and turns of Finland's relationship with alcohol. It's a story that's full of contradictions, shaped by its history, cultural norms, and what makes Finland unique.
It's fascinating how Finns have their own unique way of drinking. They might not always drink the most, but their relationship with alcohol, with those binge drinking patterns and the whole Kalsarikännit phenomenon, and well, it's definitely something else.
You're absolutely right. Finland's drinking culture, shaped by its past and its unique environment, offers a unique perspective on how different cultures view and consume alcohol.
And thinking about Sandals beer, it's almost like a symbol of this whole complex relationship Finns have with alcohol. It's about celebrating, it's about tradition, and yes, it's about that Finnish sisu. It really makes you wonder what other aspects of a country's culture might be connected to its drinking habits in ways we wouldn't expect. That's something to think about. Thanks for listening to this deep dive, everyone. We'll see you next time.